Hi everyone, I'm Russ Hamilton. I'm a retired sergeant with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation.
Hey there, True Talk fans and my keepers of chaos. Russ Hamilton here. Gonna bring you a little video tonight, a little bit of training on contraband. And the reason I'm bringing contraband up in this particular venue right now is I had a request from a gal named Sarah, who's over following stuff off of YouTube. And she wanted to know more about it. And so anyway, I told her I would, and I kind of been slacking off a little bit, but I've had a lot of personal things come up. So now I am getting to it though. So anyway, getting straight to it, you know, back when I first started at San Quentin back in 1989, you know, there were these guys and, you know, officers, some of them on the squad, some of them just, you know, regular day-to-day officers that could find things like you would not believe. Not too many of them, just a few. And I mean, they were like the elite and they knew how to go and locate stuff and boom, you know, they would have a shank or they'd find, you know, gang writings or this and that. And I mean, they were good at it and they could locate this stuff up just like it was nobody's business. And man, you know, I saw some of these, especially when I saw some of the shanks and stuff, and I said, man, that is what I want to be able to do. And it took me a while to get there. I had some people having input and stuff, but really it took me being dedicated and keeping my nose to the grindstone to be able to get to where I eventually got. But what I'm hoping is I'm hoping that this video here might shortcut things a little for you, especially if you're really interested in it. And I know that some of you out there probably do want to be or already are to a certain extent contraband hounds. So usually when someone comes up and asks me about finding contraband, the first thing that they usually come up with is, well, where should I look? And you'll see that I put in here that's the exact wrong question to ask because it's never about where you should look. It's about why you're looking there in the first place. Because really, I mean, you can do all the searches you want and you can be just as dedicated and never really locate, never find very much. You know, and that's one of the things that when they're teaching you in the academy and stuff, they really teach you to do these exclusionary searches where you're really super thorough and you go in a clockwise or counterclockwise pattern around the cell or whichever area you're searching. And you're looking to make sure that there's no contraband in that area. What you're not doing is you're not looking to actually find where contraband is. If you only look where contraband is, you'll spend a lot less time searching. Now, I know that sounds a little bit strange or a little bit out there, but I'm going to try and put it all together for you. Okay. So one of the things that I figured out pretty early on and stuff is that if I watched what inmates were doing and if I figured out in my head what their little motivations and stuff were and where the activity was, little hives of activity and stuff, that I could narrow down the areas that I needed to search and make them smaller and smaller and smaller so that I didn't have to nearly search near as much. And I would find a lot more contraband than anyone else. And I mean a lot more contraband. So the first thing that I really try and stress that you want to look for is behavior, you know, and you do that, you know, through observation. And you want to be able to see, you know, what inmates are doing, how they're interacting with other inmates, the areas that they're going to, the areas that they're moving away from, and just the way they act day to day. And that can give you an idea of where the contraband is. Now, there's ways that we're going to get to about that to narrow that down even more. But that's one of the first. And I'll never forget, I had a situation on my yard, when I was a sergeant and I'd been watching these guys. I was pretty hot at the time. You know, these guys, they'd be bird dogging me and not letting me get anywhere near them. But I've been watching them a while and just been leaving them alone. And I could see that, that every time they went by this one dorm, there was a little bit more activity than on each side. So I got a buddy of mine, Mike, and I said, Mike, go down there with someone else and you guys hang out on one side and have someone else hang out on the other, and then go through the doors on each end at the same time and just see what happens. See if you can find something. And sure enough, they went in there and they heard a locker fall and they saw it kind of moving, and they went in there and removed the locker, 2 cell phones underneath it, right? And it's just by being able to narrow stuff like that down that allows you to be far more efficient than just, going into a place and combing through it, trying to find a needle in a haystack. So that's the first thing that allows you to get it to a point. The second thing that allows you to narrow it down even more, sometimes you can't get it this far, but sometimes it's all about body language, right? Now, moving back to just a straight observation for a minute, I'll give you one example. And this was probably one of my first really, really big busts, right? I was out there and we had this, pretty small yard. It's probably the size of maybe like 4 or 5 basketball courts. It's kind of a dog leg, kind of an L-shaped. And I was sitting out there all morning and I noticed something different about the day. This one particular group, 415 Kumi, they were all hanging out over by this big iron door that we had. And every day, for months and months and months and stuff, they've been hanging out, sitting in the shade, right? And this one day, they were in the same spot, but they were just on the other side, and they were all in the sunlight. And man, I just knew that meant something. And I wasn't sure what it was. So I kind of meandered over and walked up the far side of the dogleg and meandered back, and then just kind of stepped out and looked around the corner. And the instant I did that, I hear 5-0. And right then I started yelling at all these guys to get down, drew my baton and stuff because I knew something serious was up. And my gunner started blowing the whistle, and we got all these guys down, and I grabbed the one guy and pushed him up against the wall, and he had a shank in his little cardboard lunchbox, and there were 5 more lunch boxes down there, and each of them had a shank in it too. And so that was the first big time where observation for me really, really paid off. So now moving beyond observation to body language, okay? Body language is something that, it's hard to describe exactly what to look for and stuff. But basically what you have, 2 sides, right? And anything in the middle, everything's probably okay. But it's the sides you got to look for. Sudden motion or freezing up, suddenly it gets real quiet, or suddenly it gets real loud, or you'll notice all of a sudden everyone suddenly freezes a little bit, or suddenly everyone all looks the same way. Or sometimes you'll walk into a room or a day room or something, and all of a sudden you'll notice a guy starts talking about something, and somehow you know that wasn't the subject that they were talking about before. Now, does that necessarily mean that there's contraband there? No, it doesn't. But it can be an indicator, and that's something that you have to sharpen yourself to. I know I had on the body language side, I was trying to show an officer one time what I meant about certain body language, because she just approached me. She says, show me how you're finding all these cell phones. And so we went into this one dorm. We had these 36-man dorms, and I just walked in. And the first thing I start looking for is movement. And sudden movement is the easy thing to catch. It's the slower movements that give things away that are eventually you'll have to learn to read. And so as I walked in, I saw this guy slowly sit up, and he turned and looked at me, and then he went back to what he was doing. And I was closing on his position by that time. And I was about halfway to him, so I was maybe like 20 feet from him or something. And he looked back over his shoulder and looked at me again. And that's when I knew, right? That's when I knew. There's no reason for him to look at me twice. Once would have been enough. He heard me come in. If he wasn't guilty, he didn't need to look at me twice. And so I told her, I pulled him aside and I called for some backup. I said, go look under his pillow. And there it was, cell phone right there. Okay. Sometimes it's hard to explain what the mental process is for gleaning and weeding this stuff out. What you have to do is you have to expose yourself to it over and over and over again so that you start to understand and you start to pick up on these little subtle nuances that mean things, you know. A big one is eye contact, right? You know, not sudden, how do I put this? It's the eye contact. It's either excessive, like they're staring you down, or they're tracking you too hard, or it's where they won't make eye contact at all. And that's a big one. If you suddenly see a guy, you're moving through the day room or a dorm or whatever, and suddenly somebody's walking. Maybe it's not away from you, maybe even toward you. You have to think in your mind, what are they trying to tell you? Usually they're trying to tell you that they don't want to be in that area that they're just in because there's something there, right? Now they may have something on them, but sometimes it's worth just letting them pass by to go check what's right there, right then and there. So that's just one of those things where you have to be, aware. The next thing, gut instinct. And if you've seen, I think we can put a link up to it. I did one on Tier Talk for Anthony Ganji on gut instinct. And I didn't really go into the way that I think it works, but it's just kind of my own little thing, but pay attention to it because that can really tip you off to a particular piece of contraband somewhere. I had, the first time I'll tell you this story first. The first time I ever experienced really truly where I knew that it was gut instinct or that my subconscious was picking up on something. I was on the yard and I was walking by these two inmates and one inmate was handing the other one a sandwich. And man, I just felt something was just not quite right. And so I reached over and down and pulled it back from him instantly. And took steps back, drew my baton because I didn't know what was going on yet, and started ordering them onto the ground. And sure enough, right inside that sandwich, there was a syringe. Inexplicable, yeah, but eventually, if you get your subconscious talking to your conscious, you can kind of figure out what you keyed on. That day, I never could, but I've developed it a little bit since, and I've had several other times where it really kicked in. I know I had one time where we were searching a dorm, had no inmates in there, and inmates that they'd knocked a place, and it had been there a while. There was a hole above one of the doorways and stuff. And so I went up there and I got my mirror and I looked around and couldn't see anything in there. Went on to search something else. And I kept coming back to that over and over and over again. And I searched like 3 times and couldn't find anything in it. And then finally, when we were almost done in there, I went back one more time and I put my mirror up there. I said, you know what? Is that a piece of plaster or is that? And it was a shank, right? And I mean, I'd looked at this so many times before, but something inside me was like telling me, hey, there is something there, some small little, subconscious piece of me had recognized it. So anyway, some people don't believe in gut instinct. I don't believe it's anything mysterious. I think it's the subconscious that sometimes sees things. But anyway, pay attention to it because it really is worth your time and effort. And as you expose yourself to more of this, you'll have more instances where that will kick in and you can pay attention to it and figure out sometimes even why it's telling you that particular thing. Okay, number 4 on my list here is preparation, right? And preparation allows you to try and narrow things down, like I've talked about with behavior and body language. But preparation allows you to focus your initial assessment on things. And what I would do sometimes with these guys, I would sometimes go through their particular C file and see what they'd done. Sometimes I would review recent incidents and recent contraband patterns that other officers had discovered. And sometimes I go back a couple months. Hey, this guy Smith, he had a cell phone 2 months ago. Maybe he's worth checking into again. And it's going through all those patterns and doing that background stuff that allows you to figure out, where the best fishing hole is. because it doesn't do any good to fish if there ain't no fish there. So different people are going to have to do different levels of that preparation. And sometimes it's figuring it out for yourself, but it really does pay off. And, the next one I'll talk about a little bit is tactics and tools. Let me talk about tools just real quick. Tools, you know, everyone's got a different assortment and stuff. Of course, everyone maybe thinks like, you know, some handheld metal detectors. Those are cool and they work really good and stuff. But the main tool that I always used, and that worked the best for me, or two of them, is I had a flashlight and I had a great big flimsy plastic mirror. And I would put that on a mechanic's little mirror that wasn't worth anything, put a couple of binder clips on that, and that big mirror, I could search huge areas underneath tables and stuff really fast. Not with a little mirror, but with a big mirror and a bright ass light. The brighter, the better, so that you can see easily. Because sometimes a little piece of tape, a little piece of string will mean a lot. The next, besides just the tools, are the tactics you use. And there's all kinds of tactics you can employ. And it's everything from, well, let me just give you an example here and this one was kind of like almost accidental, but I've done this before. I've got inmates to move contraband that I couldn't find for me out into an area where we could. I had my gunner one day, Officer Dunnigan, and I'll never forget this. He called me up and he said, hey, Officer John down there, he just told these guys that, he might be coming back and searching the dorm, and I think they're getting ready to move something. And I said, well, I'm all the way down on the other end. If they start moving it, let's figure out, a way to make this play. And so just a couple minutes later, he called me. He says, hey, look, he's down there hanging out not too far from where you are on dorm 4 there, but he's right on the window. And so I start my way down there and I'm looking, and all of a sudden, man, I see 2 officers and they're walking straight toward me. And this is the time where you really got to be careful, because, it's not just us reading body language. Inmates are reading body language too. Believe you me. So I just jocularly said, hey, why don't you guys come on down here? I want to go down and check out what's happening on the other end of the yard. And so they're like, okay. And I gave them a wink right then so they would know what's up. Kind of a risk in the wink, because you don't know if they're going to suddenly, give it away with a little something. But they knew what they were doing. But sometimes catch you unawares a little bit. So as we started to walk past this inmate who was about 15 or 20 feet off to my left, I saw him come back behind me by about 10 or 12 feet. And he stepped down off of the curb. And I thought, man, I got to risk a look back. And I looked, and the instant I saw him, he bolted. And I started after him, and we caught him, and he had 4 shanks on him. So be aware that sometimes when you stir up a hornet's nest, and then the hornets go to move their little larvae and stuff, that, you never know what they've got. I mean, it could have been dope, which would have been harmless, but I tell you what, seeing those shanks and stuff really got me going. Just be aware of your tactics, be aware of your tools, and, look to, employ them to the best of your ability. And never give up too. Sometimes you'll end up in a position where you don't think you can make the play, and you're wondering whether or not what you've done is going to bear fruit. And I just wanted to give, one more little story. I used to really employ a couple of these really talented tower officers that I had who could really, really read the yard for me. And so they would always be in contact with me. And this one day, he calls me up and he says, hey, this guy, I think that he's passing off a note to the other guy. And this was back, we were having a lot of problems with the Northerns and the Southerns. And so, I mean, it could have been a hit list, it could have been orders, could have been anything. And I said, where are they? And they're down on the other end of the yard. I'm like, you got to wait till they get closer to me. I said, if I come out now, it's going to be gone. So he waited a little while, and then he called me back and says, hey, they're standing right outside your door. said, I'm by myself. Which one is it? So it tells me the one that it is. And, unfortunately, we were kind of both wrong about exactly what was going on. But I stepped out there and the other guy stepped off and started walking, and I stopped to the other guy and I said, hey, hold up a second. And that's when I saw it on the ground. It was a great big ball of dope, right? And it's sitting right there on the mud. So anyway, now I'm in a quandary. There's no way for me to assign that ball of dope to anyone, right? So what do? I start questioning him. I start making him as nervous as I can. I start making him take his clothes off. I start doing a pat search on him. I start looking through each one of his clothes. Pretty soon he's so nervous that he can't take it anymore. And with his foot, he acts like he kind of gets unbalanced and steps off to the curb and steps on the ball of dope. And with his foot, mashes it down in there. And that's when I told him, I got you. So anyway, just be mindful of what you're doing. And even if it seems like, the play's gone sour, sometimes you can do something that brings it back to life. So anyway, just to recap on this stuff, if you really, really want to find contraband, you got to look for where it is, not search for where it isn't. And so all of these things, and I'm going to name them again, right? Behavior and observation, that's number 1. Body language, that's number 2. Those 2 things get you to be able to narrow down the area. Number 3 is gut instinct. Pay attention to it because it can locate that contraband sometimes when you can't do it with the rest of your senses. The next thing is preparation, man. Research, observation, all these things, looking around, seeing what's going on your yard, figuring out who the players are. That's important. Okay. Tools, right? Tools and tactics. I can't stress enough. If you don't have a bright flashlight and at least a mirror, you're not going to find anything. There's some other things that you can have. I used to have one of those little mechanics grabbers. So I could reach down in some, really places that you couldn't get to. And I pull out all kinds of things, syringes and little balls of dopes and, hit lists and all kinds of stuff. So, take as many tools with you as you can and use as many different things. I used to have a couple of, big old magnets that I had on some strings and stuff that I could lower down in places or pull stuff up out of little cracks and stuff. Think about it. There's lots of different little things that you can do to get into tight places. Inmates can get there. You got to figure out what it is too. So anyway, I think that's going to about wrap everything up. Most everything that I've presented on this video, I did in a article. I think it's been a couple, maybe even 3 years ago now in Corrections 1. But I'm going to put a link to just the article, not to Corrections 1. I don't think it will be anyway. Maybe Anthony will want to do it different. But anyway, and it's going to have all of this information, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less because I added and subtracted a little bit. But I hope everyone out there thinks that, being a contraband hound is worthwhile. And everyone, stay safe and we'll see you around.